Hi everyone, welcome to this session on data-driven insights. Today I'm going to be talking about what attendees are saying about the future of virtual and hybrid events. So if you've been following what this session's about and some of the promotion around it, you know that this is a bit of an Explori exclusive. So Explori, since the pivot to virtual events earlier this year, we have been measuring attendee experience metrics for virtual events and comparing them to the live events metrics that we have in our platform. So before I delve into that and share with you the benchmarks, which I know is what most of you are probably here for, we're going to do a bit of an introduction to myself. So my name is Natalie Campbell-Reid, and I am the content marketing lead at Explori. So if you're not familiar with Explori already, Explori is an event feedback platform, and we house over 3 million data points about attendee experience metrics in the live event space and more recently in the virtual event space as well. So I actually started my career as an event marketer for a FTSE 500 event company. I then went on to work as a marketing manager with events kind of tied in for a technology brand. And today I'm bringing my experience both on the organizer side, but also as an exhibitor to share with you some of the insights that we've been gathering at Explori over the past few months. So the highlights for today's session is going to be, what does the future hold for virtual and hybrid? I think this is a question that has been coming up a lot over the past few months. What are we going to do once we get back into in-person events? Also, how are virtual events performing in the eyes of attendees and exhibitors? So this is where we're going to dig into some of the benchmarks. What are we seeing in terms of attendee experience metrics? And also, how can organisers improve the overall experience of their virtual events? So first, one of the questions that's becoming up time and time again is, are virtual events here to stay? And really, the only way we can address that is by understanding what are some of the weaknesses and what are some of the strengths that virtual events are presenting. So around this time of the year, we would typically be releasing the Global Visitor Insight Study in partnership with UFI and supported by CISO. But like many of you, we also had to pivot. And so we have conducted a piece of research with UFI this year called the Global Recovery Insights, which is available to UFI members on the UFI website. But what I'm going to do is just take you through some of the findings that have been released. So at the time we ran the research, this was up until the end of August, and what we saw is that 50% of visitors and 50% of exhibitors had participated in a virtual event. Now we probably expect that to be a lot higher at this point, probably around the 70 to 80% mark. And around a quarter of those, had organised their own event or taken part in a dedicated sponsorship experience. So from this research, we really wanted to understand how are virtual events performing and what aspects of the virtual event experience are better, comparable, or worse than the live experience. So one of the things we've found is that virtual events are just as good as live events in terms of content. So if your attendees are coming to an event with the objective to be educated, to keep up to date with market trends, what we're seeing in the research is that a virtual event is just as good as an in-person event at delivering against these objectives. So where are virtual events falling down? When it comes to live events, our visitors are very clear. They prefer live events for networking, for the overall experience, and for doing business. Similarly, our exhibitors are saying the same. They prefer live events when it comes to networking, when it comes to that overall experience and generating leads. But that's not to say as organisers we need to down tools and just forget about the virtual experience when it comes to these things. What I actually want you to take from this presentation, this slide specifically, is where you can direct your focus to improve your virtual event. So thinking about how you can really dial up the networking experience, how can you give your visitors and exhibitors the best experience when it comes to their networking virtually, or how can we deliver that overall experience? You know, typically we're used to bringing together a group of people into one venue and creating an experience in that space. But now we've got hundreds, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of different little venues across the country and across the world where we as organisers need to create an experience. So thinking about how we go about doing that, and I'm sure you've all taken part in some and seen things such as cooking classes or live cocktail making classes and all sorts of different things. I mean, I don't have to direct you guys in terms of what the creative ways you can create an experience for your event, but also just showing them how they can generate business as well, I think is really important. And what we are really seeing about virtual events at the moment is, if I can progress, there we go, some really great opportunities. So when we dug into the data, what we were looking at, we asked if an event was organised as a hybrid, would you be more likely to attend in person or would you attend virtually? And for those who'd attended an event in person previously, they were much more likely to want to attend in person as opposed to virtually. But where this gets really interesting is if it's a new event, they're just as almost just as likely to want to attend virtually as they want to attend in person. So what you're seeing is these two pockets here, for two opportunities for virtual events. On the one hand, it's an opportunity to add an additional layer to your marketing funnel. So it's a space in which people who probably can't attend or aren't willing to attend for whatever reason are able to engage with the event, make new contacts and be educated. But then on the other hand, you have got this community of virtual attendees who may never turn into actual live delegates, but it presents a really unique opportunity to be able to provide that extra reach for your exhibitors and sponsors. So what we know is that when exhibitors and sponsors interact with an event, it is to increase their brand position, it's to generate awareness for their brand, and also to generate leads. And I haven't heard a single organiser over this time who's organised a virtual event say to me, you know what, Natalie, our registrations have been much poorer for our virtual events. Actually, it's been completely the opposite. They've been able to massively increase the reach of their event by making it virtual. And your exhibitors and sponsors are able to profit off of that. Sorry, just advancing. So what we're seeing at the moment is really we're coming to the end of done being a metric. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So I've taken this Google Trends chart, which I think really accurately depicts what happened earlier this year in terms of the pivot to virtual events. So this Google Trends chart shows the search popularity for the term virtual events from the last 12 months. And you can see around March, it really took off in terms of search popularity. And so at this time, what we were seeing is that the metric for success with virtual events was really about just getting it done. Like, let's get the event done without any catastrophic mishaps, and that is sufficient. That's all we need to do. But around this time, again, as I mentioned at the start of this presentation, at this time we were thinking about, at Explori, we were thinking about how is this impacting the attendees? What are we going to see in terms of the attendee experience metric? And so I'd like to introduce you to our benchmarks, and this is the juicy part. So we've been collecting data since March, and we did have to create some new survey templates for attendees and exhibitors and sponsors, just to kind of reflect what wasn't seen as the cyclical nature of virtual events at the time. And we've got some core KPI benchmarks now, which are stable, but there will be new benchmarks made available over time. So let's look into what's going on there. The interesting thing, and I think the positive thing, is that attendee sentiment is positive. So when we look at overall satisfaction for trade and conferences, you can see these numbers are out of 5. So what you can see is for virtual, that it's sitting pretty neatly in between trade and conferences for overall satisfaction. For Net Promoter Score, it gets even more interesting because you can see that the Net Promoter Score is quite significantly higher for virtual compared to conferences and trade shows. Does this mean that virtual events are better than live events? No, that's not what we're seeing. I think what this really suggests is that there isn't as much heavy lifting involved to make a virtual recommendation. And what I mean by that is that in order to recommend a live event to someone, to a colleague in London, the event might be in San Francisco. I know that they've got to book a flight, I know that they've got to book accommodation, take time off work, take time away from family and friends. So it's much more weight involved with making that recommendation. Whereas for a virtual event, I could send them a link which they could interact with at home, fit it into their day, get the sessions on demand, and really just choose how they interact with that. So that's why we're not seeing as much heavy lifting involved in making those recommendations. And then in terms of value for time, unsurprisingly, virtual events are coming out ahead at 3.84. Again, we don't have to go to the events. We can pretty much roll out of bed and be at a virtual event. So it's showing up higher on value for time. But what about our exhibitors? So it's interesting here because initial exhibitor sentiment is not so positive, and we already knew that there was some room for improvement in the current trade space, with net promoter score sitting at -17, return on investment at 3.07. But for virtual events, that's really taken a tumble, and we're seeing, in terms of net promoter score, much more exhibitors having a poorer experience than having a good experience, and also the ROI being quite significantly lower. But is it all bad? And the answer to that is no. So if I remind you about that 25% I mentioned earlier from the UFI research, they had a dedicated sponsorship experience. But what we see with them is that though they prefer live, they're starting to warm to virtual events. They can really see the potential with virtual events to generate leads and ROI. So whilst there is still this gap in experience that we do need to close, what we're really seeing is that exhibitors are willing to go with us on this journey. I really think they are willing to go with us as we try and figure out how virtual events work and how they can generate leads. And it's just up to us as organisers to really optimise that experience for our exhibitors and our sponsors. So how do you go about actually delivering a good virtual experience? And I'm going to hold my hands up and say, I am probably not qualified to give you all creative expertise on this. I know there's probably plenty of people across the world who have absolute creative juices to deliver a great experience. But what I do want to do is direct you into how you can do it in a way that really delivers against your attendees' objectives. So for really delivering a great experience, be this virtual or be it live, it really is about developing a robust feedback strategy. And this is something we talk about all the time at Explori, and we talk about it with clients, the event feedback loop. So this is where you're really putting your attendees, your exhibitors at the heart of the event planning. And it really starts by gathering your measurement data. So when you gather your measurement data, there's 3 different layers that you can gather. You have your demographic data, so that's who your customers are. There's the engagement data, what they did. And there is the sentiment data, which is why did they engage in the first place. And what I think is a really cool thing about virtual events right now is that there is such a huge amount of data available to organisers to leverage. So let's look at what that customer journey might look like. So what we can see here is that with virtual event platforms, all of this information, not all of it, but a large majority of it is built in already. So things like in a live event where you might have to invest in beacon technology or smart badges, it would be an additional cost to the event. These are normally built into your virtual event platform. So you can see how people are interacting with your event. So you can take your CRM data or your registration data, and you can track your attendees through their customer journey to see what desired outcomes are produced on the other end. So say, for example, if you wanted your event could be aimed at people booking a demo at the end. You want attendees to book demos at the end. What you could observe is of the people who came at the other end and booked these demos, what similarities were there in their interactions during the event? Were there different levels of engagement in the matchmaking platform between those who did end up booking a demo and those who didn't. And I think that's where it gets really interesting. I think it's just from an organizer perspective where I see massive potential there for virtual events. So if I take us back to the feedback loop, where you've gathered your measurement data, that's your first step. And then the second step is to analyze and report on that data. Then you want to communicate your findings. So you want to talk to the stakeholders, the event team, anyone who's involved and responsible for that event to break down these reports into insights. And you want to agree on a strategy for your next event. So how are you going to take what you've learned from this event and implement it going forward? And the last step is you want to execute on that strategy, and then the loop continues. And it's really by closing the loop that you're able to deliver a very strong virtual experience that keeps the needs of your attendees very much at the core of the event strategy. So, in quick summary, the future is hybrid, which presents an opportunity for organisers to reach more attendees. Attendee sentiment is positive for virtual events, but exhibitors need more help in seeing a return. So that's why we're looking at more of a dedicated sponsorship experience. And to improve the overall experience, organisers should develop a robust feedback strategy. So I just want to leave some time for questions here. So if there are any questions that come in. Morning.
Good morning. Good morning to you. Good afternoon, maybe good evening to some of our attendees who are tuning in from the Middle East. I know that we've got people who've registered to attend in Australia and the Far East as well. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. It's still very early morning to our attendees in the Americas, so they might not quite be with us yet, but if you are up early, hello to everybody who's joined day 2 of Event Tech Live. Natalie, thank you very much for the presentation so far. We have got some questions that have come in that I'd like to put to you. Now, there are 3 questions here. Broadly speaking, these questions all, I think, fundamentally ask the same thing. So I'll run through each of them, if that's okay, and then we'll come to you for maybe an overall take on all of them. So the first question, if we have a look at here, will virtual and or hybrid events ever have the same benefit as in-person events? Are there more opportunities with hybrid live events than we had before? And has the quality of events changed from live and in person compared to online events? To me, all those questions sort of feel the same in terms of quality. Let's go to the first one. Will virtual hybrid events ever have the same benefits as in person?
I think it's hard to say, and I can't say from a data perspective, I can't give a definitive answer on that. But what I've been seeing from the data is really that, yes, virtual events are very good at delivering content. They're very strong in that regard. But when it does come to the networking element, when it does come to experience, there's work to be done there in terms of organisers. So it's hard to say whether or not it will ever be exactly the same, but maybe there is still room for improvement, even if it isn't the same as live events. Because if we are moving to a hybrid model, once we're able to return to in-person events, we'll want to make those virtual experiences just as strong as they can be.
Sure. We come to a question from Inga. Thank you, Inga, for joining us on day 2 of Event Tech Live. Thank you for your question. For Natalie, are there positive events on the exhibitor side? Are there positive events on the exhibitor side, and why were they successful? How did they satisfy the exhibitor?
Yes. So typically what we find with exhibitor objectives is that where events have really aligned their event to satisfy key exhibitor objectives, such as generating leads, such as raising brand awareness, such as increasing the brand position, where an event is successfully able to meet those needs of the exhibitor, that's where you see really this has a direct correlation with satisfaction. So if you're able to really hit those objectives, you're able to deliver a very strong event. I think I don't have any specific examples, but within that Net Promoter Score that I shared, it's not all bad. So it's not to say all virtual events are not doing well for exhibitors. There are some that are doing well, and there are some which are not, unfortunately.
Sure. A question here just on the research side of things. Do you have any record on the research on what's more valued, virtual versus live? Is there any access to that research, or is anything that people may be able to speak to Explori about directly?
Yeah. So in terms of how the live versus virtual, the overwhelming preference is live events. You know, we are social creatures. We like to get together and speak and network and do that face to face. So yes, the overwhelming preference is live, but again, there are components of the virtual experience which are on par with the live events, like content delivery. In terms of the research that is being released in 2 weeks, and it's available to UFI members on the UFI website. So watch this space. If you want to get in touch with Explori, we can update you once that is released and available for everybody.
Fabulous. Going back to the questions from Glissa that have been submitted, what constitutes a robust feedback strategy?
Good question. What really constitutes a robust feedback strategy is one that keeps your attendee feedback at the very core. So when we're talking about the event feedback loop, what we typically see is around stage 2, after you've analysed and reported on the findings, is where the loop tends to break. So you've done all the hard work of gathering that data, you've analysed it, and that was great. But I know when I was an organiser, that information normally got filed away in a drawer, never to be looked at again. So we really need to start closing this loop, and a robust feedback strategy means taking that analysis, turning it into insight, and implementing it.
I was really interested. I actually made a note of it. It was slide number 9 in your deck, and it was where you are highlighting the responses between in-person and virtual when you compare them with a new event, and whether people were then willing to attend a new event as a virtual or an in-person event. Now, straight away, what the alarm bell that started going off for me was, or not alarm bell, but the opportunity was the content side of things. The big thing for me is that events are always driven by content. You know, it's one thing that we always come back to, is that they're only successful as the quality of the content that's being delivered. And if people are fundamentally interested in attending new events as a virtual platform, that to me offers the opportunity for organisers to design content from a blank canvas that's only been designed from day one to be on a virtual platform. At the moment, we're in this period of adaptation and trying to change the way we've delivered live events to make them virtual, because we have to at the moment. But there is a big opportunity, I think, going forward. I'm curious to see if you maybe agree with that, and if that's something that you've looked at as well from a content creation point of view.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point of view. I haven't thought of it that way, actually, but I think there's massive scope there, isn't it? I think what's really interesting is virtual events are pretty much a blank canvas. We can choose to recreate how we do these things. And I think it's really interesting because from a customer acquisition standpoint, this could be new attendees to you who you haven't yet engaged with. They know about your brand, they want to get a feel and a flavor of it. So really developing a content plan for them, I think, is a great idea.
And it perhaps maybe feeds us into another question on Glissa, which is, do you think virtual events will eventually take over live events? I don't know what your take would be on that one.
Yeah, no, I don't have I guess I don't have a sort of doomsday view of live events. I very much feel that, oh, it's not even just a feeling really, it's what we've been seeing in the data. Everyone prefers live events. So I don't think virtual events are going to take over live events, but I think they will provide an extra layer, an addition to something that makes that live event even better, because it's able to extend its reach. You know, as like I was saying in the presentation, I haven't spoken to a single organizer who has said they've had less registrations organising their events virtually than they have organising a live event. So there's really huge scope for increasing the reach of the event, and also for your exhibitors and your sponsors. We know that exhibitors and sponsors are there to generate leads. So if you can really expand your audience by adding a virtual component, then you're able to really satisfy their needs. So that I would say not virtual over live, hybrid probably, and maybe just some areas in which you could do virtual. So if you're just delivering content, you might just want to do that as a virtual event.
And just time for one more question from Glissa before we wrap up. Are there more opportunities with hybrid live events than we had with real life in-person events? And maybe again, if I can interpret that question as I'm reading it, is, you know, to entertain and go and dip your toe into hosting an in-person live event is quite a big commitment. If you're a first-time event organizer, for example, it can be quite daunting, the prospect of putting on your first live in-person event. And the way I'm looking at that question is, are there more opportunities maybe for first-time organizers with the virtual platform, that it may be a bit, you know, less daunting to actually explore the idea of doing it that way?
Yeah, I think again it's interesting because it depends on the needs of your audience. So if the event you're organizing, if it's aimed at helping people connect and helping people network, then we know virtual events aren't the best at doing that. So you may want to, invest into an event or maybe on a smaller scale. But what I would say is really you have to look at what objectives your attendees are trying to achieve and start there. So is virtual the best platform to do that, or is live the best to do that, or a combination of the two?
Absolutely. It brings us nicely to the end of the session, right on time as well, Natalie. Thank you very much. An absolute professional. It's been great to have you around today. Are you going to stick within the virtual event platform, and are you planning to meet any of the attendees? Have you got any meetings set up?
Yes, absolutely. So I am in grip. I'm active. I'm typing away. So if you do want to talk to me after this, just ping me over a message and put a meeting in the calendar, and I'm happy to chat with everyone here. Thank you all for
Fabulous.
joining.
No problem at all. Our thanks to Natalie Campbell-Reid, Marketing Manager at Explori, for her session on data-driven insights. What are attendees saying about the future of virtual hybrid events? Thank you to everybody for your questions. A shout out to Inga, who was the only person to put their name at the start of a question. You don't have to do that, but it's nice when you do, and we can give you a little name check. And Inga, if you're still tuned in, why don't you send us a selfie on social media of how and where you're watching Event Tech Live from? Use the hashtag ETL20, everybody, and post on social media where and how you're tuning into Event Tech Live from. As we look ahead to the other sessions of the day, what we should do, I think, is say a little thank you to